Take them if you want, the merchant said with a lazy shrug of his long, silvering shoulders. They're useless and free. The words floated through the humid air of Keld Bazaar like a bad joke, and for a moment no one nearby even bothered to turn their heads. Except the human. Daniel Mercer stopped mid-step beneath a flickering hollow sign advertising plasma harvesters. His cargo boots scraped against the metallic street panels as he slowly looked back over his shoulder. Free, he repeated. The merchant's large violet eyes blinked with mild annoyance. His species, the Talari, had narrow, elegant faces and skin that shimmered faintly like polished pearl. Most of them carried themselves with theatrical dignity. This one looked bored. Yes, free. The Talari merchant gestured carelessly toward the containment pen beside him. No credits, no contracts, just take them. Daniel followed the motion. At first he thought the merchant was joking. The pen sat half hidden between towering stacks of cargo crates and humming grav pallets. A soft containment field glowed around its perimeter, shimmering like a faint blue curtain. Inside sat 5 girls. They looked almost human. Almost, their skin carried a faint luminescent sheen, like moonlight resting just beneath the surface. Subtle markings traced along their arms and necks, glowing faintly in delicate patterns. Their ears were longer than human ears, slightly tapered, giving them an elegant silhouette. And their eyes. Their eyes watched everything. Quietly, Daniel frowned. The market around them roared with noise. Cargo drones zipped overhead. Traders from a dozen star systems shouted prices across the aisles. Alien languages clashed in the air like competing music, but the girls sat in complete silence. No one approached them. No one even looked. Why are they free? Daniel asked. The merchant sighed dramatically as if explaining something painfully obvious. Because nobody wants them. One of the nearby buyers, a heavy-set reptilian trader with bronze scales, snorted loudly. Defective royalty, the reptilian muttered. Or so the rumor goes. Daniel glanced toward him. Royalty. The reptilian scratched his chin with a claw. Used to be House of Lyran. He shrugged. Minor noble lineage from the outer systems. Famous for producing empathic navigators. Daniel blinked. Empathic navigators. People who could sense emotional currents across fleets, the reptilian explained. Political tension, hostility, fear. Very useful talent when your empire spans 50 star systems. Daniel looked back at the girls. They did not react. They just watched. The merchant waved a hand dismissively. Outdated rumors, their abilities never developed. He leaned closer to Daniel. The house that owned them collapsed years ago. Political sabotage. Gene line discredited. So what happened to them? Discarded assets. The merchant said it the way someone might say expired food. One of the girls lowered her gaze slightly. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. You're selling people, he said quietly. The merchant rolled his eyes. Please, spare me the moral lecture, human. Keld Bazaar is outside most imperial jurisdictions. That wasn't a lecture. Good. A tall, insectoid customer wandered past, paused briefly at the pen, then shook his head and walked away. Daniel noticed something strange then. The girls were watching him, not the merchant, not the market, him, 5 pairs of luminous eyes, curious, cautious, almost hopeful. He shifted awkwardly. Do they speak? He asked. The merchant shrugged again. They understand trade language. They just don't talk much. Daniel crossed his arms. What species are they? Lyrani. Never heard of them. Exactly. The reptilian trader chuckled again. Told you, worthless. One of the girls flinched, barely noticeable. But Daniel saw it. He rubbed the back of his neck. Well, what were you planning to do with them? The merchant leaned against a crate. Nothing. I was hoping someone desperate would pay a few credits for them. He glanced at the pen. But no one did. And now I want the pen space. Daniel stared at the containment field again. One of the girls looked younger than the others, maybe 16 by human standards. Her glowing markings flickered faintly as she met his eyes. She didn't look dangerous, she looked tired. Free, Daniel repeated. Yes. No strings. None. Legal transfer. The merchant tapped his wrist console. A holographic contract flickered into existence. Sign here and they're yours. The reptilian trader burst out laughing. You're not seriously considering it, are you human? Daniel tilted his head. I haul cargo, he said. Exactly. So they're not cargo. Daniel glanced at him. They're people. The reptilian blinked. Well, yes. Daniel looked back at the pen. Seems like that's the problem. For a long moment the market noise filled the silence. The merchant yawned. Are you taking them or not? I have customers waiting. Daniel studied the girls again. They sat very still, watching, waiting. Something about the way they looked at him made the busy alien market suddenly feel uncomfortable. Like the entire galaxy was watching a small decision. Daniel sighed. Well, he muttered. He stepped forward and pressed his thumb against the holographic contract. The console chimed, transfer complete. The merchant blinked. You actually did it. Daniel nodded. Guess I did. The reptilian trader stared at him in disbelief. You just adopted 5 alien nobility rejects. Daniel scratched his chin. Yeah. The reptilian shook his head. Humans are insane. Daniel smiled slightly. I get that a lot. The containment field flickered and vanished. The girls didn't move. For a moment they simply sat there, unsure. Daniel crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over them. Hi, he said, no answer. He cleared his throat. I'm Daniel. One of the older girls finally spoke, her voice soft and melodic. Why? Daniel blinked. Why what? Why did you take us? The market noise seemed to fade for a moment. Daniel thought about the question, then he shrugged. Honestly. They nodded slightly. You looked like you could use a ride. The youngest girl blinked. A ride. Daniel pointed vaguely toward the massive docking towers rising above the bazaar. My ship S parked about 2 kilometers that way. The girls exchanged uncertain glances. Daniel stood up and stretched. Well, he said casually, unless you'd rather stay here. None of them hesitated. They stood immediately. The reptilian trader watched them leave with wide eyes. You're really taking them. Daniel began walking toward the docking district. Yep. Do you even know what you bought? Daniel glanced back over his shoulder. Nope. The reptilian groaned. Human, you might have just started a political incident. Daniel laughed softly. Wouldn't be the first time. But across the market, far above the cargo lanes, 2 figures standing on a high observation balcony quietly watched the human leave with the 5 girls. One of them activated a small communication device. The human has taken them, the observer said quietly. A voice crackled through the channel. Confirm identification. Independent cargo pilot, human. A pause. Then the voice replied, interesting. Below them, Daniel Mercer walked toward docking tower 17 with 5 silent alien girls following him through the crowd. And somewhere far beyond Keld Bazaar, in the distant halls of a fractured interstellar court, someone would soon realize that the discarded daughters of House Lyran were no longer lost. They had just been taken by a human, and no one in the galaxy yet understood what that meant. By the time they reached docking tower 17, half the bazaar had already decided the human was either a fool or something far more complicated. Daniel Mercer didn't notice. He walked through the towering docking concourse like a man who had done this exact route 1,000 times before. Cargo crews rolled gravcarts across the polished floor. Docking alarms echoed through the cavernous chamber. Massive starships hung outside the transparent hull like sleeping metal giants. The 5 girls stayed close behind him, not because he ordered them to, because they didn't trust the rest of the galaxy. Several alien workers paused as they passed. One tall Virelian technician with glowing blue eyes nearly dropped the fusion coil he was carrying. Stars above, he muttered. Another dockhand, a squat insected with translucent wings, tilted its head. Human, it clicked. Why are there Lyrani following you? Daniel kept walking. Long story. They are rare, so I've been told. The insectoid hesitated. You purchased them. Technically. Why? Daniel shrugged. They needed a ride. The insectoid stared at him for several seconds, as if trying to determine whether that answer was a joke. Eventually, it shook its head and returned to work. One of the girls whispered quietly behind Daniel. They keep staring. Daniel glanced back. Yeah. Why? Humans get that a lot. That is not why. Daniel thought about that. Fair point. They stepped onto a wide lift platform that slowly carried them upward through the docking tower. The transparent walls revealed the vast spaceport outside. Hundreds of ships drifted around the orbital structure like mechanical whales. The youngest girl pressed her glowing hand lightly against the glass. Her eyes widened. There are so many ships. Daniel followed her gaze. Most of them belong to people much richer than me. A soft voice spoke from behind him. Which one is yours? Daniel pointed lazily through the glass. See that one. The girls leaned closer. Floating near docking arm C was a medium-sized transport vessel. Its hull was patched in several places, its paint faded and scratched by years of travel. One engine housing had clearly been repaired using parts that were not originally designed for that model. The ship looked tired, but stable. The name painted across the hull read, Wayward Orbit. The lift doors opened. A docking officer stood at the terminal near the airlock. She was Talari like the merchant from the bazaar, though far more professional. Her silver skin shimmered beneath the port lighting, and her eyes scanned Daniel immediately. Captain Mercer. Evening. She glanced at the girls, then back at him. You brought passengers. Looks that way. Her gaze sharpened. Lyrany passengers. Daniel scratched his neck. Word travels fast. You walked through docking tower with them. Right. That tends to get attention. One of the girls stepped slightly behind Daniel. The officer noticed. Her expression softened slightly. Are they under contract? Daniel tapped his wrist console and sent the transfer file. The officer reviewed it silently. You legally acquired them. Apparently, you realize Lyrany bloodlines have historical political value. So I've heard, and yet the merchant gave them away for free. Daniel leaned against the wall. That part did seem strange. The officer studied him for a long moment. You are not concerned. About what? That someone might want them back. Daniel shrugged. If someone wants to talk, they can knock on the airlock. The officer's luminous eyes narrowed slightly. You say that very casually. Daniel smiled faintly. I try to stay relaxed. She looked down at the girls again. They were watching Daniel, not the officer, not the docking bay, him. Interesting, the officer murmured. She handed Daniel his docking clearance. You are free to depart when ready. Appreciate it. Daniel gestured toward the airlock. All right, field trips this way. The girls hesitated at the threshold. Ships hummed quietly beyond the doorway. One of them asked softly, We may enter. Daniel looked confused. It's a ship, not a palace. But it is yours. Yeah, then we should ask permission. Daniel blinked. Well, permission granted. That seemed to satisfy them. They stepped inside. The interior of the Wayward Orbit was narrow but surprisingly clean. The corridor lights glowed warm white along the walls. Cargo containers lined one side, and a small ladder led upward toward the cockpit. The youngest girl looked around with amazement. This is your home. Daniel shrugged. Most days. Another girl touched one of the control panels carefully. You pilot this alone. Usually. Across interstellar routes. Yep, she stared at him. That is extremely dangerous. Daniel grinned. That's where the money is. From the docking bay outside, the Talari officer watched the group disappear into the ship. Another officer approached her. You let them go. Yes, you know who those girls might be. Yes, the second officer folded his arms. And the human? She looked toward the Wayward Orbit. That is what interests me. Why? She replayed the market security footage on her wrist console. It showed Daniel signing the transfer without hesitation. No negotiation. No questions about resale value, just a quiet decision. Humans are unpredictable, she said. The other officer snorted. That one just bought 5 political liabilities. Perhaps. But he did not behave like a man acquiring property. How so? She paused the footage on the moment Daniel crouched down to speak with the girls. He behaved like a man meeting people. The officer frowned. That seems like a poor survival strategy in this galaxy. She smiled faintly. Perhaps. Far above them, the Wayward Orbit's engines slowly powered up. Inside the cockpit, Daniel settled into the pilot's seat and tapped several controls. All right, he said casually. Next stop home. Behind him, the girls stood quietly, watching the stars beyond the cockpit glass. One of them spoke softly. Human Daniel. Yeah, why are you not afraid? Daniel looked over his shoulder. Of what? Of taking us. Daniel thought for a moment, then he shrugged. I guess I didn't see a reason to be. The girls exchanged silent glances. Because across half the galaxy, there were already several very serious reasons, and the first ships had just started looking for them. Space had a way of pretending everything was quiet. The Wayward Orbit drifted through the dark between star systems, its engines humming softly while distant stars burned like scattered embers across the void. For 2 days nothing happened. No pursuit, no signals, just the steady rhythm of travel. Inside the ship, the tension slowly loosened. Daniel sat in the cockpit with his boots propped against the console, sipping coffee from a dented metal mug. Rule number 1, he said casually, pointing out the forward viewport. Never trust space when it looks peaceful. Behind him, the girls sat quietly in the observation seats. One of them tilted her head. Why? Daniel shrugged. Because that usually means something is about to ruin your day. Almost on cue, the console chimed. Daniel sighed, see. He leaned forward and tapped the display. The sensor screen filled with red markers, 3 ships, fast, military fast. The youngest girl's faintly glowing markings flickered. Are they coming for us? Daniel studied the screen calmly. Looks like it. Another girl stood slowly. We should surrender. Daniel blinked. Why would we do that? They will destroy your ship. Daniel took another sip of coffee. Probably. You do not sound concerned. Daniel scratched his beard thoughtfully. Well, that depends. On what? On who they are? The comm system suddenly crackled. An unfamiliar voice filled the cockpit. Unregistered human vessel. You are ordered to power down engines and prepare for boarding. Daniel leaned toward the microphone. This is the civilian transport wayward orbit. A pause, then the voice returned. We know exactly who you are, Captain Mercer. Daniel glanced at the girls. Well, that's flattering. The voice continued. You are transporting 5 Lyrani individuals belonging to the former House of Lyran. One of the girls quietly closed her eyes. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Former. The house was dissolved. Convenient. You are currently harboring politically sensitive assets. Daniel raised an eyebrow. They're sitting right here if you want to say hello. Captain Mercer. Yeah. Power down your engines. Daniel looked out at the approaching ships. Sleek, military design, too well armed for a cargo pilot to challenge. He exhaled slowly. Well, he muttered, that's unfortunate. Behind him, the girls were silent. One of them stepped closer. Human Daniel. Yeah. You should leave. He turned, leave. We will surrender. Daniel stared at her. Absolutely not. You will die. Daniel shrugged, probably. Another girl stepped forward. Why? The question hung in the quiet cockpit. Why? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Well, he thought for a moment. Because someone once told me humans have a bad habit. What habit? Not abandoning people. The girls stared at him. One of them whispered quietly, we are not people to them. Daniel leaned back toward the console. Yeah. That's the problem. The comm crackled again. Captain Mercer. This is your final warning. Daniel sighed, all right. He flipped the switch. The engines roared to life. The wayward orbit surged forward. Behind them, the 3 warships immediately accelerated. Weapons systems powered up across their hulls. Inside the cockpit, alarms began flashing. Hostile lock detected. The youngest girl gripped the seat. They will fire. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the stars ahead. Yeah. A missile warning screamed. Daniel pulled the controls sharply. The transport rolled violently through space as a burst of plasma fire streaked past the hull. The girls gasped. Daniel grinned slightly. Okay, he muttered. That one was close. Another girl stared at him. You are smiling. Adrenaline. You are insane. Not the first time I've heard that. Another missile warning screamed, but something strange happened. All 5 girls suddenly froze. Their glowing markings brightened. A soft wave of energy rippled through the cockpit. Daniel blinked. One of the girls spoke softly. They are angry. Daniel glanced at the sensor screen. You can feel them. Yes. The girls looked at each other. Something invisible connected them. A shared focus. Their luminous markings began pulsing in perfect rhythm. Daniel felt a sudden calm settle over the cockpit. Not silence, not absence of fear, but clarity. The girls spoke together. They are not united. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What? They do not trust each other. 2. The ships. On the sensor screen, something strange happened. The 3 pursuing vessels began drifting slightly apart. Then one of them shifted course. The comm channel erupted with angry shouting between the ships. Daniel stared at the screen. What did you do? One of the girls looked surprised. We only listened. Daniel laughed softly. Well, I'll be damned. The 3 warships now argued across open channels. Accusations, distrust, hidden agendas suddenly exposed. One of them fired at another. Within seconds, the pursuit turned into chaos. Daniel gently increased speed. The wayward orbit slipped away into the darkness. No one followed. Silence returned. For several minutes, no one spoke. Finally, Daniel leaned back in his chair. Well, that was exciting. The girls stared at him. You knew we could do that? Nope, you risked everything without knowing. Daniel shrugged. I figured you were probably more useful than they thought. The youngest girl blinked slowly. No one ever believed that. Daniel looked back at them. I did. The cockpit fell quiet again. Outside the viewport, stars stretched endlessly across the galaxy. One of the girls stepped forward. Human Daniel. Yeah, you changed our fate. Daniel scratched his neck. I just gave you a ride. She shook her head gently. No. Her luminous markings glowed softly. You gave us a future. Daniel didn't answer. He simply turned the ship toward the distant blue star that marked the direction of Earth. Behind him, 5 alien girls who had once been called worthless watched the stars with quiet determination. Across the galaxy, rumors had already begun spreading about a human cargo pilot, about the lost daughters of House Lyran, and about the moment an entire empire realized something important. Humans did not see value the way the rest of the galaxy did. Sometimes. They simply saw people, and that changed everything.